My name is Ashley. I'm 28 years old and Anishinaabe from Treaty 1 territory. And I would like to acknowledge the generous hosts of the land I now live on, the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. I love making videos and I'm very excited to bring Anne Frank's story into your home. Friday, August 14th, 1942. Dear Kitty, I've deserted you for an entire month. But so little has happened that I can't find a newsworthy item to relate every single day. The Van Dans arrived on July 13th. We thought they were coming on the 14th, but from the 13th to the 16th, the Germans were sending out call-up notices right and left and causing a lot of unrest. So they decided it would be safer to leave a day too early than a day too late. Peter Van Daan arrived at 9:30 in the morning while we were still at breakfast. Peter's going on 16, a shy, awkward boy whose company won't amount to much. Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan came half an hour later. Much to our amusement, Mrs. Van Daan was carrying a hat box with a large chamber pot inside. "I just don't feel at home without my chamber pot," she exclaimed. And it was the first item to find a permanent place under the divan. Instead of a chamber pot, Mr. Van D was lugging a collapsible tea table under his arm. From the first, we ate our meals together, and after 3 days, it felt as if the 7 of us had become one big family. Naturally, the Van Dans had much to tell about the week we'd been away from civilization. We were especially interested in what had happened to our apartment and to Mr. Goldschmidt. Mr. Van Daan filled us in. Monday morning at 9, Mr. Goldschmidt phoned and asked if I could come over. I went straight away and found a very distraught Mr. Goldschmidt. He showed me a note that the Frank family had left behind. As instructed, he was planning to bring the cat to the neighbors, which I agreed was a good idea. He was afraid the house was going to be searched, so we went through all the rooms, straightening up here and there and clearing the breakfast things off the table. Suddenly I saw a notepad on Mrs. Frank's desk with an address in Maastricht written on it. Even though I knew Mrs. Frank had left it on purpose, I pretended to be surprised and horrified and begged Mr. Goldschmidt to burn this incriminating piece of paper. I swore up and down that I knew nothing about your disappearance, but that the note had given me an idea. "Mr. Goldschmidt," I said, "I bet I know what this address refers to. About 6 months ago, a high-ranking officer came to the office. It seems he and Mr. Frank grew up together. He promised to help Mr. Frank if it was ever necessary. As I recall, he was stationed in Maastricht. I think this officer has kept his word and is somehow planning to help them cross over to Belgium and then to Switzerland. There's no harm in telling this to any friends of the Franks who come asking about them. Of course, you don't need to mention the part about Maastricht. And after that, I left. This is the story most of your friends have been told, because I heard it later from several other people. We thought it was extremely funny, but we laughed even harder when Mr. Van Daan told us that certain people have vivid imaginations. For example, one family living on our square claimed they saw all 4 of us riding our bikes early in the morning. And another woman was absolutely positive we'd been loaded into some kind of military vehicle in the middle of the night. Yours, Anne. Friday, August 21st, 1942. Dear Kitty, now our secret annex has truly become secret. Because so many houses are being searched for hidden bicycles, Mr. Kugler thought it would be better to have a bookcase built in front of the entrance to our hiding place. It swings out on its hinges and opens like a door. Mr. Voskugil did the carpentry work. Mr. Voskugil has been told that the 7 of us are in hiding, and he's been most helpful. Now whenever we want to go downstairs, we have to duck and then jump. After the first 3 days, we were all walking around with bumps on our foreheads from banging our heads against the low doorway. Then Peter cushioned it by nailing a towel stuffed with wood shavings to the doorframe. Let's see if that helps. I'm not doing much schoolwork. I've given myself a vacation until September. Father wants to start tutoring me then, but we have to buy all the books first. There's little change in our lives here. Peter's hair was washed today, but that's nothing special. Mr. Van Daan and I are always at loggerheads with each other. Mama always treats me like a baby, which I can't stand. For the rest, things are going better. I don't think Peter's gotten any nicer. He's an obnoxious boy who lies around in his bed all day, only rousing himself to do a little carpentry work before returning to his nap. What a dope. Mama gave me another one of her dreadful sermons this morning. We take the opposite view of everything. Daddy's a sweetheart. He may get mad at me, but it never lasts longer than 5 minutes. It's a beautiful day outside, nice and hot. And in spite of everything, we make the most of the weather by lounging on the folding bed in the attic. Yours, Anne. Comment added by Anne on September 21st, 1942. Mr. Van Daan has been as nice as pie to me recently. I've said nothing, but have been enjoying it while it lasts. Wednesday, September 2nd, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan have had a terrible fight. I've never seen anything like it, since Mother and Father wouldn't dream of shouting at each other like that. The argument was based on something so trivial, it didn't seem worth wasting a single word on it. Oh well, to each his own. Of course, it's been very difficult for Peter, who gets caught in the middle, but no one takes Peter seriously anymore, since he's hypersensitive and lazy. Yesterday, he was beside himself with worry because his tongue was blue instead of pink. This rare phenomenon disappeared as quickly as it came. Today, he's walking around with a heavy scarf on because he's got a stiff neck. His Highness has been complaining of lumbago, too, aches and pains in his heart. Kidneys and lungs are also par for the course. He's an absolute hypochondriac. That's the right word, isn't it? Mother and Mrs. Van Daan aren't getting along very well. There are enough reasons for the friction. To give you one small example, Mrs. Van D has moved all but 3 of her sheets from our communal linen closet. She's assuming that Mother's can be used for both families. She'll be in for a nasty surprise when she discovers that Mother has followed her lead. Furthermore, Mr. Van D is ticked off because we are using her china instead of ours. She's still trying to find out what we've done with our plates. They're a lot closer than she thinks, since they're packed in cardboard boxes in the attic behind a load of Opekta advertising material. As long as we're in hiding, the plates will remain out of her reach. Since I'm always having accidents, it's just as well. Yesterday, I broke one of Mrs. Van D's soup bowls. "Oh," she angrily exclaimed, "can't you be more careful? That was my very last one." Please bear in mind, Kitty, that the 2 ladies speak abominable Dutch. I don't dare comment on the gentlemen. They'd be highly insulted. If you were to hear their bungled attempts, you'd laugh your head off. We've given up pointing up their errors, since correcting them doesn't help anyway. Whenever I quote Mother and Mrs. Van Daan, I'll write proper Dutch instead of trying to duplicate their speech. Last week, there was a brief interruption in our monotonous routine. This was provided by Peter in a book about women. I should explain that Margot and Peter are allowed to read nearly all the books Mr. Kleeman lends us, but the adults preferred to keep this special book to themselves. This immediately piqued Peter's curiosity. What forbidden fruit did it contain? He snuck off with it when his mother was downstairs talking, and took himself and his booty to the loft. For 2 days, all was well. Mrs. Van Daan knew what he was up to, but kept mum until Mr. Van Daan found out about it. He threw a fit, took the book away, and assumed that would be the end of the business. However, he neglected to take his son's curiosity into account. Peter, not in the least fazed by his father's swift action, began thinking up ways to read the rest of this vastly interesting book. In the meantime, Mrs. Van D asked Mother for her opinion. Mother didn't think this particular book was suitable for Margot, but she saw no harm in letting her read most other books. You see, Mrs. Van Daan, Mother said, there's a big difference between Margot and Peter. To begin with, Margot's a girl, and girls are always more mature than boys. Second, she's already read many serious books and doesn't go looking for those which are no longer forbidden. Third, Margot's much more sensible and intellectually advanced as a result of her 4 years at an excellent school. Mrs. Van Daan agreed with her, but felt it was wrong as a matter of principle to let youngsters read books written for adults. Meanwhile, Peter had thought of a suitable time when no one would be interested in either him or the book. At 7:30 in the evening, when the entire family was listening to the radio in the private office, he took his treasure and stole off to the loft again. He should have been back by 8:30, but he was so engrossed in the book that he forgot the time and was just coming down the stairs when his father entered the room. The scene that followed was not surprising. After a slap, a whack, and a tug of war, the book lay on the table and Peter was in the loft. This is how matters stood when it was time for the family to eat. Peter stayed upstairs. No one gave him a moment's thought. He'd have to go to bed without his dinner. We continued eating, chatting merrily away, when suddenly we heard a piercing whistle. We laid down our forks and stared at each other, the shock clearly visible on our pale faces. Then we heard Peter's voice through the chimney. "I won't come down." Mr. Van Daan leapt up, his napkin falling to the floor, and shouted, with the blood rushing to his face, "I've had enough!" Father, afraid of what might happen, grabbed him by the arm, and the two men went to the attic. After much struggling and kicking, Peter wound up in his room with the door shut, and we went on eating. Mrs. Van Daan wanted to save a piece of bread for her darling son, but Mr. Van D was adamant. If he doesn't apologize this minute, he'll have to sleep in the loft. We protested that going without dinner was enough punishment. What if Peter were to catch a cold? We wouldn't be able to call the doctor. Peter didn't apologize and returned to the loft. Mr. Van Daan decided to leave well enough alone, though he did note the next morning that Peter's bed had been slept in. At 7, Peter went to the attic again, but was persuaded to come downstairs when Father spoke a few friendly words to him. After 3 days of sullen looks and stubborn silence, everything was back to normal. Yours, Anne.
Hi, my name is Tiana Ostindi. I'm 24 years old, and I'm Métis and Dutch, born in Canada. I'm currently living in Vancouver for my studies. Monday, September 21st, 1942. Dearest Kitty, today I'll tell you the general news here in the annex. A lamp has been mounted above my divan bed so that in the future, when I hear the guns going off, I'll be able to pull a cord and switch on the light. I can't use it at the moment because we're keeping our window open a little, day and night. The male members of the Fendon contingent have built a very handy wood-stained food safe with real screens. Up to now, this glorious cupboard has been located in Peter's room, but in the interest of fresh air, it's been moved to the attic. Where it once stood, there's now a shelf. I advised Peter to put his table underneath the shelf, add a nice rug, and hang his own cupboard where the table now stands. That might make his little cubbyhole more comfy, though I certainly wouldn't like to sleep there. Mrs. Van Daan is unbearable. I'm continually being scolded for my incessant chatter when I'm upstairs. I simply let the words bounce right off me. Madame now has a new trick up her sleeve, trying to get out of washing the pots and pans. If there's a bit of food left at the bottom of the pan, she leaves it to spoil instead of transferring it to a glass dish. Then, in the afternoon, when Margot is stuck with cleaning all the pots and pans, Madame exclaims, "Oh, poor Margot, you have so much work to do." Every other week, Mr. Kleiman brings me a couple of books written for girls my age. I'm enthusiastic about Jopterhul series. I've enjoyed all of Sissy van Marksveldt's books very much. I've read The Zaniest Summer 4 times, and the ludicrous situations still make me laugh. Father and I are currently working on our family tree, and he tells me something about each person as we go along. I've begun my schoolwork. I'm working hard at French, cramming 5 irregular verbs into my head every day. But I've forgotten much too much of what I've learned in school. Peter has taken up his English with great reluctance. A few school books have just arrived, and I brought a large supply of notebooks, pencils, erasers, and labels from home. Pim, that's our pet name for Father, wants me to help him with his Dutch lessons. I'm perfectly willing to tutor him in exchange for assistance with French and other subjects, but he makes the most unbelievable mistakes. I sometimes listen to the Dutch broadcasts from London. Prince Bernhard recently announced that Princess Juliana is expecting a baby in January, which I think is wonderful. No one here understands why I take such an interest in the royal family. A few nights ago, I was the topic of discussion, and we all decided I was ignoramus. As a result, I threw myself into my schoolwork the next day, since I have little desire to still be a freshman when I'm 14 or 15. The fact that I'm hardly allowed to read anything was also discussed. At the moment, Mother's reading Gentlemen, Wives, and Servants, and of course I'm not allowed to read it, though Margot is. First, I have to be more intellectually developed, like my genius of a sister. Then we discussed my ignorance of philosophy, psychology, and physiology. I immediately looked up these big words in the dictionary. It's true, I don't know anything about these subjects, but maybe I'll be smarter next year. I've come to the shocking conclusion that I have only 1 long-sleeve dress and 3 cardigans to wear in the winter. Father's given me permission to knit a white wool sweater. The yarn isn't very pretty, but it'll be warm, and that's what counts. Some of our clothing was left with friends, but unfortunately, we won't be able to get to it until after the war. Provided it's still there, of course. I just finished writing something about Mrs. Van Daan when she walked into the room. Thump. I slammed the book shut. Hey, Anna, can't I even take a peek? No, Mrs. Van Daan. Just the last page, then. No, not even the last page, Mrs. Van Daan. Of course I nearly died, since that particular page contained a rather unflattering description of her. There's something happening every day, but I'm too tired and lazy to write it all down. Yours, Anna. Friday, September 25th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Father has a friend, a man in his mid-70s named Mr. Dreyer, who's sick, poor, and deaf as a post. At his side, like a useless appendage, is his wife, 27 years younger and equally poor, whose arms and legs are loaded with real and fake bracelets and rings left over from more prosperous days. This Mr. Dreyer has already been a great nuisance to Father, and I've always admired the saintly patience with which he handled this pathetic old man on the phone. When we were still living at home, Mother used to advise him to put a gramophone in front of the receiver, one that would repeat every 3 minutes, "Yes, Mr. Dreyer," and "No, Mr. Dreyer," since the old man never understood a word of Father's lengthy replies anyway. Today Mr. Dreyer phoned the office and asked Mr. Kugler to come and see him. Mr. Kugler wasn't in the mood and said he would send Miep, but Miep canceled the appointment. Mrs. Dreyer called the office 3 times, but since Miep was reportedly out of the entire afternoon, she had to imitate Bep's voice. Downstairs in the office, as well as upstairs in the annex, there was a great hilarity. Now each time the phone rings, Bep says, "That's Mr. Dreyer," and Miep has to laugh, so that the people on the other end of the line are greeted with an impolite giggle. Can't you just picture it? This has got to be the greatest office in the whole wide world. The bosses and the office girls have such fun together. Some evenings, I go to the Van Daans for a little chat. We eat mothball cookies, molasses cookies that were stored in a closet that was moth-proofed, and have a good time. Recently, the conversation was about Peter. I said that he often pats me on the cheek, which I don't like. They asked me in a typically grown-up way whether I could ever learn to love Peter like a brother, since he loves me like a sister. "Oh no," I said, but what I was thinking was, "Oh, ugh." Just imagine, I added, that Peter's a bit stiff, perhaps because he's shy. Boys who aren't used to being around girls are like that. I must say that the Annex Committee, the men's section, is very creative. Listen to the scheme they've come up with to get a message to Mr. Brox, an Opecta Co. sales representative, and a friend who's surreptitiously hidden some of our things for us. They're going to type a letter to a store owner in southern Zeeland, who is, indirectly, one of Opecta's customers, and ask him to fill out a form and send it back in the enclosed self-addressed envelope. Father will write the address on the envelope himself. Once the letter is returned from Zeeland, the form can be removed and a handwritten message confirming that Father is alive can be inserted in the envelope. This way, Mr. Brox can read the letter without suspecting a ruse. They chose the province of Zeeland because it is close to Belgium. A letter can easily be smuggled across the border, and because no one is allowed to travel there without a special permit. An ordinary salesman like Mr. Brox would never be granted a permit. Yesterday, Father put on another act. Groggy with sleep, he stumbled off to bed. His feet were cold, so I lent him my bed socks. 5 minutes later, he flung them to the floor. Then he pulled the blankets over his head because the light bothered him. The lamp was switched off, and he gingerly poked his head out from under the covers. It was all very amusing. We started talking about the fact that Peter says Margot is a Batinsky. Suddenly, Daddy's voice was heard from the depths. "Sits on her butt, you mean?" Mooshie the cat is becoming nicer to me as time goes by, but I'm still somewhat afraid of her. Yours, Anna. Sunday, September 27th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Mother and I had a so-called discussion today, but the annoying part is that I burst into tears. I can't help it. Daddy is always nice to me, and he also understands me much better. At moments like these, I can't stand Mother. It's obvious that I'm a stranger to her. She doesn't even know what I think about the most ordinary things. We were talking about maids and the fact that you're supposed to refer to them as domestic help these days. She claimed that when the war is over, that's what they'll want to be called. I didn't quite see it that way. Then she added that I talk about later so often that I act as if I were such a lady, even though I'm not. But I don't think building sandcastles in the air is such a terrible thing to do, as long as you don't take it too seriously. At any rate, Daddy usually comes to my defense. Without him, I wouldn't be able to stick it out here. I don't get along with Margot very well either. Even though our family never has the same kind of outbursts they have upstairs, I find it far from pleasant. Margot and Mother's personalities are so alien to me. I understand my girlfriends better than my own mother. Isn't that a shame? For the umpteenth time, Mrs. Van Daan is sulking. She's very moody and has been removing more and more of her belongings and locking them up. It's too bad Mother doesn't repay every Van Daan disappearing act with a frank disappearing act. Some people, like the Van Daans, seem to take special delight not only in raising their own children, but in helping others raise theirs. Margot doesn't need it, since she's naturally good, kind, and clever, perfection itself, but I seem to have enough mischief for the two of us. More than once, the air has been filled with the Van Daan's admonitions and my saucy replies. Father and Mother always defend me fiercely. Without them, I wouldn't be able to jump back into the fray with my usual composure. They keep telling me I should talk less, mind my own business, and be more modest, but I seem doomed to failure. If Father weren't so patient, I'd have long ago given up hope of ever meeting my parents' quite moderate expectations. If I take a small helping of a vegetable I loathe and eat potatoes instead, the Vandans, especially Mrs. Vandan, can't get over how spoiled I am. Come on, Anna. Eat some more vegetables, she says. No, thank you, ma'am, I reply. The potatoes are more than enough. Vegetables are good for you. Your mother says so too. Have some more, she insists, until father intervenes and upholds my right to refuse a dish I don't like. Then Mrs. Van D really flies off the handle. You should have been at our house, where children were brought up the way they should be. I don't call this a proper upbringing. Anna is terribly spoiled. I'd never allow that. If Anna were my daughter. This is always how her tirades begin and end. If Anna were my daughter. Thank goodness I'm not. But to get back to the subject of raising children, yesterday a silence fell after Mrs. Vandan finished her little speech. Father then replied, I think Anna is very well brought up. At least she's learned not to respond to your interminable sermons. As far as the vegetables are concerned, all I have to say is look who's calling the kettle black. Mrs. Vandan was soundly defeated. The pot calling the kettle black refers, of course, to Madame herself, since she can't tolerate beans or any kind of cabbage in the evening because they give her gas. But I could say the same. What a dope, don't you think? In any case, let's hope she stops talking about me. It's so funny to see how quickly Mrs. Vandan flushes. I don't, and it secretly annoys her no end. Yours, Anna.
Hi, my name is Tila. I was born in the Netherlands and then I moved to Canada at the age of 9. I am 23 years old now and super excited to be reading for you today. Monday, 28 September 1942. Dear Kitty, I had to stop yesterday, long before I'd finished. I just must tell you about another quarrel, but before I start on that, something else. Why do grown-ups quarrel so easily, so much, and over the most idiotic things? Up till now, I thought that only children squabbled and that wore off as you grew up. Of course, there is sometimes a real reason for a quarrel, but this is just plain bickering. I suppose I should get used to it, but I can't nor do I think I shall, as long as I am the subject of nearly every discussion. They use the word discussion instead of quarrel. Nothing, I repeat, nothing about me is right. My general appearance, my character, my manners are discussed from A to Z. I am expected, by order, to simply swallow all the harsh words and shouts in silence, and I'm not used to this. In fact, I can't. I am not going to take all these insults lying down. I'll show them that Anne Frank wasn't born yesterday. Then they'll be surprised and perhaps they'll keep their mouths shut when I let them see that I am going to start educating them. Shall I take up that attitude? Plain barbarism. I'm simply amazed again and again over their awful manners and especially stupidity. Mrs. Van Dans. But as soon as I get used to this, and it won't be long, then I'll give them some of their own back in no half measures. Then they'll change their tune. I am really so bad-mannered. Am I really so bad-mannered, conceited, headstrong, pushing, stupid, lazy, etc., as they all say? Oh, of course not. I have my faults, just like everyone else, and I know that, but they thoroughly exaggerate everything. Kitty, if only you knew how I sometimes boil under so many jibes and jeers. And I don't know how long I shall be able to stifle my rage. I shall just blow up one day. Still, no more of this. I've bored you long enough with all these quarrels. But I simply must tell you of one highly interesting discussion at table. Somehow or other, we got onto the subject of Bims, Daddy's nickname. Extreme modesty. Even the most stupid people have to admit this about Daddy. Suddenly Mrs. Van Daan says, I, too, have an unassuming nature, more so than my husband. Did you ever? The sentence in itself shows quite clearly how thoroughly forward and pushing she is. Mr. Van Daan thought he ought to give an explanation regarding the reference to himself. I don't wish to be modest. In my experience, it does not pay. Then to me, take my advice, Anna. Don't be too unassuming. It doesn't get you anywhere. Mummy agreed with this too. but Mrs. Van Daan had to add, as always, her ideas on the subject. Her next remark was addressed to Mummy and Daddy. "You have a strange outlook on life. Fancy saying such a thing to Anna. It was very different when I was young, and I feel sure that it still is, except in your modern home." This was a direct hit at the way Mummy brings up her daughters. Mrs. Van Daan was scarlet by this time, Mummy calm and cool as a cucumber. People who blush get so hot and excited it is quite a handicap in such a situation. Mummy, still entirely unruffled, but anxious to close the conversation as soon as possible, thought for a second, and then said, "I find, too, Mrs. Van Daan, that one gets on better in life if one is not over-modest. My husband now, and Margot, and Peter are exceptionally modest, whereas your husband, Anna, you, and I, though not exactly the opposite, don't allow ourselves to be completely pushed to one side." Mrs. Van Daan, "But, Mrs. Frank, I don't understand you. I'm so very modest and retiring. How can you think of calling me anything else?" Mummy, "I did not say you were exactly forward, but no one could say you had a retiring disposition." Mrs. Van Daan, "Let us get this matter cleared up once and for all. I'd like to know in what way I am pushing. I know one thing, if I didn't look after myself, I'd soon be starving." This absurd remark in self-defense just made Mummy rock with laughter. That irritated Mrs. Van Daan, who added a string of German-Dutch, Dutch-German expressions until she became completely tongue-tied. Then she rose from her chair and was about to leave the room. Suddenly her eye fell on me. You should have seen her. Unfortunately, at the very moment that she turned around, I was shaking my head sorrowfully. Not on purpose, but quite involuntarily, for I had been following the whole conversation so closely. Mrs. Van Daan turned round and began to reel off a lot of harsh German, common and ill-mannered, just like a coarse, red-faced fishwife. It was a marvelous sight. If I could draw, I'd have liked to catch her like this. It was a scream, such a stupid, foolish little person. Anyhow, I've learned one thing now. You only really get to know people when you've had a jolly good row with them. Then and then only can you judge their true characters. Yours, Anne.
Tuesday, 29 September 1942. Dear Kitty, extraordinary things can happen to people who go into hiding. Just imagine, as there is no bath, we use a wash tub, and because there is hot water in the office, by which I always mean the whole of the lower floor, all 7 of us take it in turns to make use of this great luxury. But because we are all so different, and some are more modest than others, each member of the family has found his own place for carrying out the performance. Peter uses the kitchen in spite of its glass door. When he's going to have a bath, he goes to each one of us in turn and tells us that we must not walk past the kitchen for half an hour. He seems to think this is sufficient. Mr. Van Daan goes right upstairs. To him it is worth the bother of carrying hot water all that way, so as to have the seclusion of his own room. Mrs. Van Daan simply doesn't bathe at all at present. She's waiting to see which is the best place. Daddy has his bath in the private office, Mummy behind a fire guard in the kitchen. Margot and I have chosen the front office for our scrub. The curtains there are drawn on Saturday afternoons, so we wash ourselves in semi-darkness. However, I don't like this place any longer, and since last week, I've been on the lookout for more comfortable quarters. Peter gave me an idea, and that was to try the large office toilet. There I can sit down, have the light on, lock the door, pour my own bath water away, and I'm safe from prying eyes. I tried my beautiful bathroom on Sunday for the first time, and although it sounds mad, I think it is the best place of all. Last week the plumber was at work downstairs to move the drains and water pipes from the office toilet to the passage. This change is a precaution against frozen pipes, in case we should have a cold winter. The plumber's visit was far from pleasant for us. Not only were we unable to draw water the whole day, but we could not go to the toilet either. Now it is rather indecent to tell you that we did to overcome this difficulty. However, I'm not such a prude that I can't talk about these things. The day we arrived here, Daddy and I improvised a potty for ourselves. Not having a better receptacle, we sacrificed a glass preserving jar for this purpose. During the plumber's visit, nature's offerings were deposited in these jars in the sitting room during the day. I don't think this was nearly as bad as having to sit still and not talk the whole day. You can't imagine what a trial that was for Miss Quack Quack. I have to whisper on ordinary days, but not being able to speak or move was 10 times worse. After being flattened by 3 days of continuous sitting, my bottom was very stiff and painful. Some exercises at bedtime helped. Yours, Anne. Thursday, 1st of October, 1942. Dear Kitty, I got a terrible shock yesterday. Suddenly, at 8 o'clock, the bell rang loudly. Of course, I thought that someone had come. You'll guess who I mean. But I calmed down a bit when everyone said it must be some urchins or perhaps the postman. The days are becoming very quiet here. Lewin, a small Jewish chemist and dispenser, works for Mr. Kraler in the kitchen. He knows the whole building well, and therefore we are always afraid that he'll take it into his head to have a peep in the old laboratory. We are as quiet as mice. Who, 3 months ago, would have ever guessed that Quicksilver Anne would have to sit still for hours, and what's more, could. The 29th was Mrs. Von Dahn's birthday. Although it could not be celebrated in a big way, we managed a little party in her honor, with a specially nice meal, and she received some small presents and flowers. Red carnations from her husband. That seems to be a family tradition. To pause for a moment on the subject of Mrs. Von Dahn, I must tell you that her attempts to flirt with Daddy are a source of continual irritation for me. She strokes his face and hair, pulls her skirt right up, and makes so-called witty remarks, trying in this way to attract Bim's attention. Bim, thank goodness, doesn't find her either attractive or funny, so he doesn't play ball. Mummy doesn't behave like that with Mr. Von Dahn. I've said that to Mrs. Von Dahn's face. Now and then Peter comes out of his shell and can be quite funny. We have one thing in common from which everyone usually gets a lot of amusement. We both love dressing up. He appeared in one of Mrs. Von Dahn's very narrow dresses, and I put on his suit. He wore a hat and I a cap. The grown-ups were doubled up with laughter, and we enjoyed ourselves as much as they did. Ellie has bought new skirts for Margot and me at Bijenkorf's. The material is rotten, just like sacking, and they cost 24 florins and 750 florins, respectively. What a difference compared with before the war. Another nice thing I've been keeping up my sleeve. Ellie has written to some secretarial school or other and ordered a correspondence course in shorthand for Margot, Peter, and me. You wait and see what perfect experts we shall be by next year. In any case, it's extremely important to be able to write in code. Yours, Anne. Saturday, 3rd of October, 1942. Dear Kitty, there was another dust-up yesterday. Mummy kicked up a frightful row and told Daddy just what she thought of me. Then she had an awful fit of tears, so, of course, off I went too, and I got such an awful headache anyway. Finally, I told Daddy that I'm much more fond of him than Mummy, to which he replied that I'd get over that. But I don't believe it. I have to simply force myself to stay calm with her. Daddy wishes that I would sometimes volunteer to help Mummy when she doesn't feel well or has a headache, but I shan't. I'm working hard at my French, and I'm now reading La Belle Nivernaise. Yours, Anne. Friday, 9th October, 1942. Dear Kitty, I've only got dismal and depressing news for you today. Our many Jewish friends are being taken away by the dozen. These people are treated by the Gestapo without a shred of decency, being loaded into cattle trucks and sent to Westerbork, the big Jewish camp in Drenthe. Westerbork sounds terrible. Only one washing cubicle for 100 people and not nearly enough laboratories. There's no separate accommodation. Men, women, and children all sleep together. One hears of frightful immorality because of this, and a lot of the women, and even girls who stay there any length of time, are expecting babies. It is impossible to escape. Most of the people in the camp are branded as inmates by their shaven heads, and many also by their Jewish appearance. It is as bad as this in Holland. Whatever will it be like in the distant and barbarous regions they are sent to? We assume that most of them are murdered. The English radio speaks of their being gassed. Perhaps that is the quickest way to die. I feel terribly upset. I couldn't tear myself away while Miep told these dreadful stories, and she herself was equally wound up for that matter. Just recently, for instance, a poor old crippled Jewess was sitting on her doorstep. She had been told to wait there by the Gestapo, who had gone to fetch a car to take her away. The poor old thing was terrified by the guns that were shooting at English planes overhead and by the glaring beams of the searchlights. But Miep did not dare take her in. No one would undergo such a risk. The Germans strike without the slightest mercy. Ellie, too, is very quiet. Her boyfriend has got to go to Germany. She's afraid that the airmen who fly over our homes will drop their bombs, often weighing 1,000,000 kilos on Dirk's head. Jokes such as, he's not likely to get 1,000,000, and it only takes one bomb, are in rather bad taste. Dirk is certainly not the only one who has to go. Trainloads of boys leave daily. If they stop at a small station en route, sometimes some of them manage to get out unnoticed and escape. Perhaps a few manage it. This, however, is not the end of my bad news. Have you ever heard of hostages? That's the latest thing in penalties for sabotage. Can you imagine anything so dreadful? Prominent citizens, innocent people, are thrown into prison to await their fate. If the saboteur can't be traced, the Gestapo simply put about 5 hostages against the wall. Announcements of their deaths appear in the paper frequently. These outrages are described as fatal accidents. Nice people, the Germans, to think that I was once one of them too. No, Hitler took away our nationality long ago. In fact, Germans and Jews are the greatest enemies in the world. Yours, Anne. Friday, 16 October, 1942. Dear Kitty, I'm terribly busy. I've just translated a chapter out of La Belle Nivernaise and made notes of new words. Then a perfectly foul math problem and 3 pages of French grammar. I flatly refuse to do these math problems every day. Daddy agrees that they're vile. I'm almost better at them than he is, though neither of us are much good, and we often have to fetch Margot. I'm the furthest on one of the 3 of us in shorthand. Yesterday I finished The Assault. It's quite amusing, but doesn't touch Jokter Hill. As a matter of fact, I think Sissy von Marksveld is a first-rate writer. I shall definitely let my children read her books. Mommy, Margot, and I are as thick as thieves again. It's really much better. Margot and I got in the same bed together last evening. It was a frightful squash, but that was just the fun of it. She asked if she could read my diary. I said yes, at least bits of it. And then I asked if I could read hers, and she said yes. Then we got onto the subject of the future. I asked her what she wanted to be, but she wouldn't say and made a great secret of it. I gathered something about teaching. I'm not sure if I'm right, but I think so. Really, I shouldn't be so curious. This morning I was lying on Peter's bed, having chased him off at first. He was furious with me, not that I cared very much. He might be a bit more friendly with me for once. After all, I did give him an apple yesterday. I asked Margot if she thought I was very ugly. She said that I was quite attractive and that I had nice eyes. Rather vague, don't you think? Till next time, yours, Anne. Tuesday, 20 October, 1942. Dear Kitty, my hand still shakes, although it's 2 hours since we had the shock. I should explain that there are 5 fire extinguishers in the house. We knew that someone was coming to fill them, but no one had warned us when the carpenter, or whatever you call him, was coming. The result was that we weren't making any attempt to keep quiet until I heard hammering outside on the landing opposite our cupboard door. I thought of the carpenter at once and warned Ellie, who was having a meal with us, that she shouldn't go downstairs. Daddy and I posted ourselves at the door so as to hear when the man left. After he'd been working for a quarter of an hour, he laid his hammer and tools down on top of our cupboard, as we thought, and knocked at our door. We turned absolutely white. Perhaps he had heard something after all and wanted to investigate our secret den. It seemed like it. The knocking, pulling, pushing, and wrenching went on. I nearly fainted at the thought that this utter stranger might discover our beautiful secret hiding place. And just as I thought my last hour was at hand, I heard Mr. Copehouse say, "Open the door, it's only me." We opened it immediately. The hook that holds the cupboard, which can be undone by people who know the secret, had got jammed. That was why no one had been able to warn us about the carpenter. The man had now gone downstairs, and Copehouse wanted to fetch Ellie, but couldn't open the cupboard again. It was a great relief to me, I can tell you. In my imagination, the man who I thought was trying to get in had been growing and growing in size until in the end he appeared to be a giant and the greatest fascist that ever walked the earth. Well, luckily everything was okay this time. Meanwhile, we had great fun on Monday. Miep and Hank spent the night here. Margot and I went in Mummy and Daddy's room for the night so that the von Sontens could have our room. The meal tasted divine. There was one small interruption. Daddy's lamp blew a fuse, and all of a sudden we were sitting in darkness. What was to be done? There was some fuse wire in the house, but the fuse box is right at the very back of the dark storeroom. Not such a nice job after dark. Still, the men ventured forth, and after 10 minutes we were able to put the candles away again. I got up early this morning. Hank had to leave at 8:30. After a cozy breakfast, Meep went downstairs. It was pouring, and she was glad not to have to cycle to the office. Next week, Ellie is coming to stay for a night. Yours, Anne. Dear Kitty, I am awfully worried. Daddy is ill. He has a high temperature and a red rash. It looks like measles. Think of it, we can't even call a doctor. Mommy is letting him have a good sweat. Perhaps that will send his temperature down. This morning, Meep told us all that all the furniture has been removed from the Van Daan's home. We haven't told Mrs. Van Daan yet. She's such a bundle of nerves already, and we don't feel like listening to another moan over all the lovely china and beautiful chairs that she left at home. We had to leave almost all our nice things behind, so what's the good of grumbling about it now? I'm allowed to read more grown-up books lately. I'm now reading Eva's Youth by Nico van Zuchtelen. I can't see much difference between this and the schoolgirl love stories. It is true there are bits about women selling themselves to unknown men in back streets. They ask a packet of money for it. I'd die of shame if anything like that happened to me. Also, it says that Eva has a monthly period. Oh, I'm so longing to have it too. It seems so important. Daddy has brought the plays of Goethe and Schiller from the big cupboard. He's going to read to me every evening. We've started with Don Carlos. Following Daddy's good example, Mummy has pressed her prayer book into my hand. For decency's sake, I read some of the prayers in German. They are certainly beautiful, but they don't convey much to me. Why does she force me to be pious, just to oblige her? Tomorrow we are going to light the fire for the first time. I expect we shall be suffocated with smoke. The chimney hasn't been swept for ages. Let's hope the thing draws. Yours, Anne.
We'll see you next time as we continue reading Diary of a Young Girl, Anne Frank. Thanks for joining.